Hello there and welcome to Lore Nerd, the show where we discuss World of Warcraft's expansive lore and story. My name is Tuskeh, and in this video we will be covering the second part of the world story. If you haven't watched part 1 of Lore Nerd, then I suggest you do. Of course, this particular video won't include every character that was important to the storyline. If we cover everything in great detail, we would be here for hours. So if I skip over some things, then I do apologize. So let's get straight down to it, starting where we left off. Over the thousands of years after the War of the Ancients and the Sundering, the world slowly began to recover. The Dragonflights helped grow the World Tree over Hyjal, and realizing that the Burning Legion would likely be attracted to the new well's power, resolved to protect the World Tree from demons forevermore. The Night Elves enjoyed an era of peace and prosperity, overseeing the resurgence of creatures that existed before the Sundering, such as furbolgs and quillboars. The few Highborn that did survive the Sundering suffered from extreme withdrawal, and Magister leader Dath'remar openly mocked the Druids, calling them cowards for not wielding their magical birthright. The Night Elves responded by instituting a law that punished the use of magic with death, but this did not slow Dath'remar and the Highborn. They conjured up a magical storm over the forests of Ashenvale, the Night Elves' new home, in an effort to make the Night Elves understand that they controlled their magic. But the Druids had had enough. They had to do something, but rather than just put down so many of their kin, which they couldn't bring themselves to do, the Night Elves instead exiled the Highborn from their lands. Glad to be rid of their narrow-minded cousins, the Highborn crafted special ships to survive the trip east, towards the eastern lands that men would one day call Lordaeron. There they planned to build their own magical kingdom, Quel'Thalas, and reject the Night Elves' worship of the moon. They would instead revere the sun, and be known as the High Elves. The Night Elves, free of their reckless cousins, soared to their kingdom of peace on Kalimdor. The Druids, sensing that the time for their hibernation had come, departed their families and made their way to barrow dens, great caves in the ground where they would sleep for thousands of years, linked to the world through Ysera's Emerald Dream. Tyrande, now the High Priestess of the Night Elves, asked her love Malfurion not to go into the Emerald Dream, stay with her. But he was honor bound to do so, and stated that they would never truly be apart as long as they held true to their love. Left alone to protect Kalimdor, Tyrande set about creating the Sentinels, a group of powerful huntresses made from the females of the Night Elves. They pledged themselves to the defense of Kalimdor and trained hard together. They built allies, patrolled their forest homes, and watched over the peace. Cenarius, the demigod, remained near the Night Elves, settling in the nearby moonglades of Mount Hyjal. His sons, known as the Keepers of the Grove, kept close watch on the world and the Night Elves, helping the Sentinels keep order and peace maintained. Even Cenarius' daughters, the Shy Dryads, appeared in the open with increasing frequency. Tyrande herself knew little joy even despite being busy with the policing of Ashenvale. Long years passed as Malfurion, her love, slept, and years became centuries. All the while, Tyrande maintained her vigil, ever concerned that one day the Burning Legion might return to exact its revenge upon Azeroth. You might say, wait a minute, the Night Elves are not immortal anymore. How is Tyrande staying alive all these years? Well, the Dragonflights blessed Hyjal and created a new world tree, and from that power the Night Elves regained their immortality. Meanwhile, Dath'remar led his High Elven brethren across the sea, challenging the storms of the Maelstrom with his Highborn fleet. They lost many ships and, for several years, struggled to find anything that remained of the supercontinent of Kalimdor. Dath'remar himself took upon the name Sunstrider, or He Who Walks the Day. Racked by their addiction to magic, the High Elves eventually landed upon the beaches of the Eastern Kingdoms. Forging inland, they found for themselves a settlement within the tranquil Tirisfal glades. But although they stayed there for several years, they eventually moved. Why, you ask? Well, after some time, many of the High Elves began to lose their minds and go mad. It's never actually been explained why this is, but theories range from their lack of magical energy to feed off of to the influence of an old god. In any case, the High Elves packed up and moved northward, where they found a land rich in magical energy. The journey was perilous. Without the Well of Eternity upon which they depended, the High Elves began to fall ill. Many of them died to starvation or from the harsh elements which they were originally immune to. The race as a whole shrank in height and their violet skin paled, becoming more pink and human-like. Speaking of humans, the High Elves encountered many strange creatures on their journey, including tribes of primitive humans that hunted through the forests. But of all the creatures and people that they encountered, the most dangerous were the forest trolls of Zul'Aman. Moss-skinned trolls of huge height and barbaric strength. These trolls were part of an Amani empire that stretched across most of the northern sections of the land, and they were hostile in every way. Barbaric and evil, the Amani Empire attacked the elves on sight, and the High Elves developed a deep loathing for them. There was no talking between the High Elves and the Amani trolls. They killed one another as soon as they saw each other. After many long years of travelling, constantly being hounded by the Amani, the High Elves finally found what they were after. Deep within the northern forests of the continent, they founded the kingdom of Quel'Thalas, vowing to create a mighty empire that would dwarf their night elf cousins. Unfortunately, they learnt soon after that they had founded their empire on top of an ancient, ruined Amani city. This escalated the skirmishes between the High Elves and the Trolls even more. Despite this, the High Elves dug in and used their magic to keep the Trolls at bay. Under Dath'remar's leadership, they were able to defeat Amani warbands that outnumbered them 10-1. They did this with their magic, but they knew that it was dangerous, and many among the High Elves were wary of the Night Elves' previous warnings, that magic would draw the attention of the Burning Legion once more. So to keep their lands safe and their magic out of the way, they created a series of runestones at various points around Quel'Thalas, which marked the boundaries of a barrier of magic. This masked their magic from extra-dimensional threats like the Burning Legion, and helped to frighten away the superstitious troll warbands. Over time, Quel'Thalas became a shining city, a monument to the High Elves' power. Their empire grew great, and they flagrantly used magic in every aspect of their lives. For nearly 4,000 years, they enjoyed a peaceful life in their secluded kingdom. However, they had underestimated the tenacity of the Amani trolls. They had not been scared off, nor had they been driven away. They were just scheming, waiting. Finally, a gigantic troll army charged out of the shadowy forests and laid siege to the shining spires of Quel'Thalas. As the High Elves and the Amani trolls waged a terrible war over Quel'Thalas, the scattered humans of Lordaeron were fighting one another to consolidate their lands. Split into small tribes, they raided one another's encampments with little heed of honor or unification, a far cry from the humans as we now know them. However, as this tribal warfare took place, one particular tribe, known as the Arathi, noticed the conflict to the north. They noticed the trolls and saw that they were becoming a large threat, too large to ignore. With their tribes scattered, the humans would be easy prey for the Amani. And so the Arathi cunningly outmaneuvered and outfought their rival tribes. But after every victory, they offered peace and equality to the conquered people, and as such, they won the loyalty of those they had beaten. Eventually, their tribe grew, swelling in number as they absorbed more tribes into them. Confident that they could hold their own against the troll warbands, the Arathi warlords decided to construct a mighty fortress city in the southern regions of Lordaeron. They named it Strom, and it became the capital of the Arathi nation of Arathor. It prospered, and humans from all over the continent traveled to Strom for its safety and protection. Now united under one banner, the human tribes developed a strong culture. Thoradin, the king of Arathor, knew that the mysterious elves in the northern sections of the continent were under constant siege by the trolls, but refused to risk the safety of his people in defense of the strange, reclusive elves. Many months passed as rumors of the elves' supposed defeat trickled down from the north. However, it was only when battered ambassadors from Quel'Thalas reached Strom that King Thoradin realized just how great the troll threat truly was. The elves informed Thoradin that the troll armies were vast, and that if they destroyed Quel'Thalas, then they would eventually move on to destroy Strom. So desperate were the High Elves that in return for military aid from the humans, they offered to teach and instruct groups of them to wield magic. Thoradin warily agreed, and High Elf sorcerers quickly began training some of the humans to wield magic. The humans, although clumsy, had a natural affinity for it, and their 100 trained magicians, along with the mighty human armies, moved with the High Elves to combat the trolls. The war was great, and the battle against the Amani ended only when the High Elves and their human magician allies called down fire from the sky to burn the trolls. With Thoradin's army running them down, the trolls splintered and fled into the forests, never to fully reform again. Assured that Quel'Thalas was saved, the elves made a pledge of loyalty and friendship with the humans of Arathor, and to the bloodline of its king, Thoradin. Humans and elves would nurture peaceful relations for ages to come. Quel'Thalas began to rebuild after the war with the trolls, and the armies of Arathor returned home. Both societies grew, but Thoradin, wary that his kingdom would splinter if it overextended itself, maintained that Strom was the center of the empire. However, after many peaceful years of growth and commerce, Thoradin died of old age, leaving Arathor's younger generations free to expand the empire beyond the lands of Strom. The original 100 Magi who were tutored by the High Elves expanded their powers, and studied the disciplines of spellweaving in great detail. Initially chosen for their strong wills and noble spirits, these mages practiced their magic with care and responsibility. However, as they passed on their ways to the younger generations, this message was lost. Unburdened by any war, the younger mages began to practice magic for personal gain, and as the empire grew, the young magicians began to spread out into the Southlands as well. Their magic allowed them to protect other humans from the wild creatures of the land, making it possible for new city-states to be constructed in the wilderness. But as their powers grew, the magicians became more and more isolated from the rest of society. The city-state of Dalaran was created, and magicians flocked to it to study. There they built up the enchanted spires of the city and reveled in the pursuit of their studies. The citizens of Dalaran tolerated the mages' endeavors and built up an economy under the protection of their magic-wielding defenders. Yet, as more and more magicians practiced their arts, the fabric of reality around Dalaran began to weaken and tear. Agents of the Burning Legion, who had been banished when the Well of Eternity collapsed, were slowly lured back into the world by the heedless spellcasting of the mages of Dalaran. Although these demons were relatively weak compared to the ones that appeared in the War of the Ancients, and they did not appear in force, they did sow considerable confusion and chaos within the streets of Dalaran. These humans had never really seen demons before. Since these were mostly isolated events, the Majorcrats of Dalaran, yes that is a word, did what they could to keep the demonic attacks out of the public eye. The most powerful mages were sent to capture or destroy the demons, but they often found themselves outmatched by the lone agents of the Burning Legion. After months of superstition running rampant, the peasantry began to suspect that their sorceress rulers were hiding something terrible from them. Rumors of revolution began to sweep through the streets as paranoid citizenry questioned the motives and practices of the mages they once admired. The Majorcrats, fearing that the peasants would revolt and that Strom would take action, turned to the only group that understood the problem, the High Elves. Upon hearing the news, the High Elves dispatched their mightiest wizards to Dalaran. These wizards studied the currents of energy around the city and made detailed reports of all demonic activity that they witnessed. They concluded that although there were only a few demons on the loose, the Legion itself would remain a dire threat so long as humans continued to wield the forces of magic. And so the Council of Silvermoon, which ruled over the elves, entered into a secret pact with the Majorcrats of Dalaran. They told the humans of the ancient history of Kalimdor and the Burning Legion, a history that still threatened the world. So long as the humans continued to use magic, they would need to protect the citizenry from the agents of the Legion. The Majorcrats proposed empowering a single mortal champion who would utilize their collected powers in order to fight in a secret war against the Legion. It was stressed that the majority of mankind could never know about these guardians or the threat of the Legion, for if they did, then fear and paranoia would run rampant. The elves agreed to the proposal and founded a secret society that would watch over the selection of the Guardian and help to stem the rise of chaos in the world. This secret society held its meetings in the Tirisfal Glades, where the High Elves had first settled. Thus, they named the secret sect the Guardians of Tirisfal. Mortal champions were chosen to be guardians, imbued with incredible powers from both the humans and the elves. Though there would only ever be one guardian at a time, they held such vast power that they could single-handedly fight back against the Legion's agents. Only the Council of Tirisfal was allowed to choose potential successors to the mantle of guardianship, for whenever a new guardian grew too old or wearied of the war, the council would choose a new champion and, under controlled conditions, channel the guardian power into its new agent. The original guardian would pass on the power. Generations passed, with the Guardians defending humanity from the invisible threat of the Legion. Arathor grew and prospered, magic spreading throughout the Empire. Meanwhile, the Guardians maintained their vigil. Deep within the depths of the world, the Earthen, who had previously been overseeing their charge of shaping and overseeing the depths of the earth, were deeply affected by the sundering of the Well of Eternity. They had felt the scarring of the land as it sundered and had sealed themselves away within the stone chambers where they were first created. Uldaman, Uldum, Ulduar, names of ancient Titan cities where the Earthen were first made. Although it is unclear what exactly awakened them, the Earthen sealed in Uldaman eventually arose from their self-imposed slumber. These Earthen had found that in their slumber they had changed. Their stone hides had softened into skin, and their powers over stone and earth had faded. They had become mortal. Calling themselves dwarves, the last of these Earthen left the halls of Uldaman and ventured out into the world. Still attracted to the safety and wonders of the earth, they founded a kingdom under the highest mountain they could find. They named their land Khazmodan in honor of the titan Khazgoroth. Constructing an altar for their titan father, the dwarves created a mighty forge within the heart of the mountain. From there, a city grew around the forge that, to this day, is known as Ironforge. The dwarves, fascinated with gems and stone by their very nature, set out to mine the surrounding mountains for rich and precious minerals. Content with their labours under the world, the dwarves remained isolated from the affairs of their surface-dwelling neighbours, at least for now. Within the human kingdom of Strom, city-states were beginning to rise across the continent. City-states such as Gilneas, Alterac, and Quel'Thalas were the first to rise, and although they each had their own customs and commerce, they all held true to the unifying authority of Strom. Under the vigilant watch of the Order of Tirisfal, Dalaran became the chief centre for magicians throughout the land. The Magicrats founded the Kirin Tor, a specialised sect that was charged with cataloguing and researching every spell, artifact, and magical item known to mankind. Gilneas and Alterac became strong supporters of Strom and developed mighty armies that explored the southern lands of Khazmodan. Here, the humans met the dwarves and travelled into their cavernous city of Ironforge. There, they discovered they had many things in common: a love for metalsmithing, engineering, storytelling, and battle. They shared many secrets with one another. Meanwhile, Quel'Thalas, founded upon an island south of Lordaeron, developed an economy based on shipping and fishing, building up a fleet of merchant vessels that sailed throughout the land in search of goods to trade and sell. Yet, even as the economy of Arathor flourished, its strongest elements began to disintegrate. The lords of Strom began to move their estates to the lush northlands of Lordaeron and leave the arid lands of the south. The heirs of King Thoradin argued that Strom should not be abandoned, but the greater citizenry were eager to leave for greener pastures to the north. Leaving their ancient city behind, these noble lords sought purity and enlightenment in the untamed north. Far north of Dalaran, the lords of Strom built a new city-state named Lordaeron. The entire continent would take its name from this city-state alone, and over time the city became vastly important for religious travellers and all those who sought inner peace and security. The descendants of the Arathi, left within the crumbling walls of ancient Strom, decided to travel south, past the rocky mountains of Khazmodan, and into the northern regions of the continent they would name Azeroth. In a fertile valley they founded the Kingdom of Stormwind, which you should know of. The few loyal warriors who remained in Strom decided to remain and guard the ancient city. Strom was no longer the centre of the empire, but it did develop into a new nation known as Stromgarde. Though each of the city-states became prosperous in its own right, the Empire of Arathor had effectively disintegrated. Each nation developed its own customs and beliefs, and they became increasingly segregated from one another. King Thoradin's vision of a unified humanity had faded, and so the Seven Kingdoms were founded: Lordaeron, Alterac, Gilneas, Dalaran, Stromgarde, Stormwind, and Quel'Thalas. Now, one last short story before we end this episode. I find it fitting that we begin and end with the Night Elves, for now we speak of the War of the Shifting Sands. During this war, in the heart of the desert of Silithus, a great tragedy and burden beset Fandral Staghelm, one of the archdruids of the Night Elves. Long ago, before the Sundering, the Trolls had successfully dissolved an empire of insectoids known as the Achaea. One of the sects of this empire fled into the deserts that would one day become Silithus. There, they found something, who shaped them into the Silithid servants that it intended to release upon the world. Within an ancient ruined city, the Kiraji, the rulers of the insectoid Silithid, built an army under the supervision of their Dark Master. Eventually, the gates of Ahn'Qiraj opened and the Kiraji swept across the desert. However, they were not unopposed. Fandral Staghelm, archdruid of the Night Elves, led a force of Night Elves against the endless hordes of the Kiraji. They met in great combat, and the entirety of the desert became a war zone, with Kiraji and Night Elves battling toe-to-toe. Fandral and his son, Valstan, fought to contain the rising tide. If they failed, then the Kiraji would overrun Kalimdor and, potentially, the world. But he believed in the Night Elves' strength. With the battle raging in Silithus, Fandral made a decision that he would soon regret. The determined tactician sent his son, Valstan, to Southwind Village, a Night Elf outpost within the desert. With a contingent of Night Elf forces, Valstan set out to defend the outpost. only to find a trap waiting for him. His men were slaughtered and Valstan himself was captured by a huge and terrifying Karaji known as General Rajax. Fandral Staghelm, heavy-hearted but not broken, pushed on to try and defeat the Karaji and defend Kalimdor. He assumed his son was dead, but his iron will pushed on. It wasn't long after this that General Rajax himself confronted Fandral on the battlefield. He had perceived that the Archdruid had only one weakness, one deviation from his iron control of himself. And so, Rajax presented Fandral Staghelm with his son. Allowing Valstan to call out, he then brutally ripped him apart with his pincers. His plan worked. Fandral's will was completely shattered. He lost the will to fight, and Silithus was eventually overrun by the Karaji, and Staghelm and his armies were forced back through the crater of Ongoro and into the desert of Tanaris. Fandral's arrogance had led to a decimated army and a murdered child. With no other choice, Fandral travelled to the Caverns of Time, home of the Bronze Dragonflight, and begged the leader of the group, Anachronos, descendant of Nosdormu, for aid. Initially, Anachronos refused to involve the Bronze Dragonflight in the affairs of the lesser races, but as all hope seemed lost, the Karaji attacked the Caverns of Time themselves. This brazen attack stirred the Bronze Dragonflight from inaction, and Anachronos agreed to pledge the Dragonflight's assistance to the Night Elves. But even that was not enough. For every 50 Karaji annihilated by a Bronze Dragon's breath, 100 would be waiting to take their place. The Night Elves' battered lines were faltering, and they were facing the prospect of retreating ever further into the wilds of Feralus. And so, Anachronos decided that the children of the Aspects must be made aware. He called out to Merithra of the Dream, child of Ysera. She in turn called out to Kael'Thras, child of Alexstrasza. Aragos, child of Malagos, joined them, and together with Anachronos, child of Nosdormu, the dragons met high above Ahn'Qiraj. They watched an endless stream of Karaji pour out from the city, and it became clear that no amount of force could win this war. From inside the main temple, tens of thousands of Karaji waited. With each passing second, more were hatched, ready to be unleashed into the world. Aragos of the Blue Dragonflight was the first to notice strange emanations from the temple. A section of it radiated a magic unlike anything he had ever sensed before. Although they attempted to investigate, the dragons could not penetrate the temple to find the source. They realized that only something of immense power could shield the temple as it did, and perhaps this immense being of power was controlling the Karaji. The dragons knew that they had to react quickly, lest the Night Elves would fall completely and the world would be in peril. After careful deliberation, the dragons decided to stop the host of Karaji at their source, to create a prison of Ahn'Qiraj, and close its gates from the world. I will quote the short story named The War of the Shifting Sands, written by Mickey Nielsen, directly, told from the perspective of Shiramar, a Night Elf priestess. Shiramar later heard whispers that the dragons flying above the ancient city from which the Karaji emerged saw something distressing there. Something that hinted at a more ancient, terrifying presence behind the onslaught of the insect race. Perhaps it was this revelation that spurred the dragons and Fandral to hatch their final desperate plan, to contain the Karaji within the city, to erect a barrier that would confine them until a more hopeful stratagem could be devised. With the aid of the 4 dragonflights, the final push to the city began. Shiramar marched behind Fandral as the corpses of the winged Karaji fell from the sky. High above, the dragons were making short work of the insect soldiers. As one, the Night Elves and dragons formed a moving wall, which pressed the Karaji back towards the city of Ahn'Qiraj. But near the city gates, the tide turned, and it was all the combined forces could do to hold the line. To push any further would be impossible. Merithra, Kael'Thras, and Aragos decided to push into the city and hold the Karaji back long enough for Anachronos, Fandral, and the remaining druids and priestesses to create the magical barrier. And so the 3 dragons and their companions flew headlong into the Karaji legions, into the city where they hoped their sacrifice would not be in vain. Outside the gates, Fandral called upon the druids to focus their energies, as Anachronos summoned the enchanted barricade. Beyond the gates, the 3 dragon progeny succumbed to the overwhelming forces as the Karaji surged forth. Shiramar concentrated her energies and called upon the blessing of Elune as the barrier erected itself before their eyes, rock and stone and roots from beneath the sands emerging to create an impenetrable wall. Even the winged soldiers who attempted to fly over the barrier met with an invisible obstruction that they could not pass. The Karaji who remained outside the wall were quickly slain. The corpses of Kuraji, night elves, and dragons littered the bloody sands. Anachronos motioned to a scarab scuttling below his feet. As Shiramar watched, the creature froze, then flattened out, transforming into a metallic gong. Stones shifted into place near the wall, creating a dais where the gong was finally placed. The great dragon then proceeded to the severed limb of one of his fallen companions. He held the appendage, and after a series of incantations, the limb morphed into the shape of a scepter. The dragon told Fandral that should any mortal ever wish to pass the magical barrier and access the ancient city, they need only strike the scepter against the gong, and the gates would open. He then handed the scepter to the archdruid. Fandral looked down, his face twisting in contempt. I want nothing to do with Silithus, the Kuraji, and least of all, any damned dragons. With that, Fandral swung the enchanted object into the magical gates, where it splintered in a shower of fragments, and walked away. Would you shatter our bond for the sake of pride? The dragon asked. Fandral turned. My son's soul will find no comfort in this hollow victory, dragon. I will have him back. Though it takes millennia, I will have my son back. Fandral then strode past Shiramar, who could see him in her mind even now, as if it were only yesterday and not 1,000 years past. That's it for this episode of Lore Nerd. We've delved pretty deeply into the lore of WoW at this point, and yet we still haven't even reached the release of the game. We're nearly there though. Next time we'll be going into The Last Guardian, the War of the Three Hammers, the story of Old Draenor, and more. If you have any thoughts, questions, comments or suggestions, then you can leave a comment below or use the links in the description to contact me. As always, I offer my deep and heartfelt thanks to my patrons for contributing to the channel's continued existence, with thanks today going out to Jason DeBoard. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you fellow lore nerds next time.